I was born and raised in a small American town in the state of Ohio. My brother and I weren't the closest family, but we weren't a disaster either. Our parents worked a lot, so we grew up on our own. My brother is 2 years older than me, and all my life I felt like he was always ahead. At school, he was on the sports team, girls liked him, boys respected him. I was quieter, did better in school, but never received the same attention. I was used to him always being in the center, and me somewhere nearby. When I entered college, I met Kelly. She was studying in the same department as me. We started talking and dated for almost 2 years. She was something special to me. Not just a girl, but a person with whom I felt truly happy for the first time. We spent almost all our time together, making plans for the future. I even thought about proposing to her when we graduated. We often went to my parents', sometimes for the holidays, and that's where it all began. Kelly met my brother. At the time, I didn't notice that he was talking too much to her. They joked, laughed, and I was glad that she got along with my family. But over time, I began to notice strange things. She started messaging him on social media. At first, she explained that he was just an interesting conversationalist, that they discussed movies, sports, and joked. I believed her. I wanted to believe that I wasn't a jealous psycho, that everything was honest and open between us. But then I began to notice that she sometimes disappeared. She said she was dating a friend, that she had school or work. And this always coincided with the fact that my brother was also busy. A suspicion grew inside me, but there was no proof. One evening, I decided to go to my brother's place without warning. I told Kelly that I had a lot of work and she didn't mind. When I pulled up to his house, I saw her car near his garage. My heart sank. I sat in the car, my hands shaking. I wanted to burst in to cause a scene, but I held back. I left, but inside I was seething. The next day, I asked her where she had been that evening. She said she had gone to see a friend. I nodded silently, although everything inside me was breaking down. I realized that I had been betrayed, and not just by her, but by my own brother. But I had no direct evidence. I decided I needed to act smart. I installed an app on my old phone, which I had discreetly left at my brother's house. He wasn't very tech-savvy, so he didn't notice. The phone recorded video and sound whenever there was movement. A couple of weeks later, I had everything. I saw her arrive at his place. I saw them sitting on his couch, kissing, and then going into the bedroom. I watched it all and felt like everything inside me was burning up. The two people closest to me had simply walked all over me. I kept silent. I continued seeing her, pretending I didn't know anything. But inside, I was making a plan. I wanted them to feel what I felt. Time passed, and soon I found out they were together. Kelly announced to me that we had to break up. She said she had feelings for someone else. I pretended not to understand, even though I already knew everything. A month later, my brother wrote to me that he had something important to tell me. He said he was dating Kelly and that they were going to get married. I listened and nodded, although all that was spinning in my head was that they had stolen everything from me. My love, my trust, a part of my life. I told him I was happy for them, that I supported them. He was overjoyed, unaware that I had proof of his lies in my hands. The wedding date was set for the summer. The whole town knew about it. My parents were happy, and so were my relatives. I, meanwhile, was preparing for my revenge. I took all the recordings and edited a video that clearly showed him cheating on Kelly with another girl, because my brother turned out to be not only a traitor, but also a coward. While he was building a family on my grief, he continued to seek adventures on the side. I accidentally obtained these recordings while I was still following him. He thought I had already moved on, but I continued to collect evidence. The video showed everything: him meeting some woman in a motel, them going out together, hugging, kissing. I guarded it like a weapon. The wedding day arrived. I came like all the guests. I smiled, congratulated, pretended to be happy. Inside, I was shaking. When the moment came with the slideshow, where they usually show photos of the newlyweds, I suggested playing a short video with a congratulatory message. No one suspected. And then the footage began to roll on the screen. First, regular photos, and then abruptly switched to a video. And everyone saw my brother kissing another woman in a motel. At first, the room was silent. Then there were shouts, whispers, laughter. Kelly turned pale, her eyes filled with tears. My brother jumped up and ran to the screen, but it was too late. Everyone saw everything. His reputation was shattered in minutes. The wedding descended into chaos. The parents were shocked, the guests were leaving. And I sat and watched as their carefully crafted picture of the perfect family crumbled. And inside, I felt like I'd finally evened the score. After the wedding, I was one of the first to leave. The hall was filled with noise. Someone was shouting, someone was crying, someone was trying to separate the guests who were already arguing among themselves. I got in the car and drove home. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. I knew I'd done everything right, but inside I didn't feel a sense of victory, more like emptiness. I sat in my apartment in silence and waited for him to call. And a couple of hours later, the phone rang. His name was on the screen. I didn't pick it up. 5 minutes later, it rang again, then again and again. I turned off the sound and just stared at the wall. That night, I received more than 20 messages. First, he wrote, "What have you done?" Then, "You've ruined everything." Then he threatened to come and sort it out. And then he started begging, "Let me explain, you've got it all wrong." I didn't answer. In the morning, my mother called. Her voice was shaking. She asked if what everyone had seen was true. I said yes. She fell silent, then exhaled, "Why did you do it like that?" I replied that it was the only way to show everyone who he was. My mother cried. She said the whole family was now in disgrace. The neighbors would talk. Relatives had turned their backs. I listened and understood that for her, the most important thing was her reputation, and not the fact that her son had betrayed another son. After this conversation, I left the house and went to work, although I hadn't really slept. Everyone there already knew. Some joked, some shrugged, but I didn't care. That same evening, my brother came to visit. I heard a knock on the door. At first, I didn't want to open it, but then I decided, let him talk. He stood there pale, his eyes red, as if he hadn't slept. As soon as I opened the door, he tried to come in, but I blocked the entrance. He began talking quickly, making excuses. He said he loved Kelly, that the video meant nothing, that it was before the engagement, that he didn't want to lose her. I listened and said nothing. He said I ruined his life, that now she'd left him, that his parents were turning away. He blamed me, even though he knew perfectly well it was his own fault. At one point, he tried to grab my shoulder, but I pushed him away sharply. He almost fell. I said he stole my girlfriend from me, that he'd lied to my face, and now he was trying to portray himself as the victim. He fell silent and just looked at me. Then he said I wasn't a saint either, that I'd been following him all this time, peeping, filming, and that it wasn't normal. I replied that it wasn't normal to sleep with your brother's girlfriend. He started making excuses again, saying it was a strong feeling, that he couldn't help himself. I saw that he didn't believe those words. Fear was evident in his eyes. He knew it was all over. That evening he left, slamming the door, but the story didn't end there. My parents called me a couple of days later. They wanted to talk. We gathered at their house like before, but the atmosphere was dead. My mother sat there tear-stained. My father was silent, only looking at me with a heavy gaze. They said I had acted cruelly, that I could have decided things differently, that it wasn't necessary to disgrace the family. I asked them, how else could it be? He betrayed me, took my girlfriend, and no one was going to stop him. I told them the truth, but they didn't care about the truth. What mattered to them was that the neighbors were now whispering, that people looked at us askance at church. I realized they had no support and never would. They sided with him even after everything. It was like a second betrayal. That night I left my parents and never came back, but my brother didn't leave me alone. He wrote and called again. In one message, he wrote that if I didn't remove the video from the internet, he would find me and break me. Yes, one of the guests filmed the video and the recording went viral on social media. Now it was not just the guests who saw it, but everyone around him. His job was hanging by a thread. His friends had turned their backs. Kelly had disappeared from his life. He was going crazy, and he blamed only me. But one night he came to me again. I was about to call the police, but he raised his hands and said he wouldn't fight. He wanted to have a real talk. We were sitting in the kitchen. He said he hated me, but at the same time he was jealous. That I had always been right smart, that my parents often compared him to me. That he liked Kelly at first, back when I first started dating her, but he didn't tell her. And then, when she herself started paying attention to him, he couldn't refuse. He confessed it and cried. I looked at him and felt no pity. For me, he was already a stranger, but what he said at the end made me think. He said he had one more secret, that if I told my parents, things would get even worse. He hinted at some connection at work, at money he'd gotten from somewhere. But he didn't tell me everything then, he just dropped the word and left. I sat alone and thought, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe what I did was just the beginning. After my brother left that night, leaving behind a hint of some secret, I sat in the dark for a long time and couldn't sleep. Two forces warred within me. On the one hand, I felt victorious because his perfect picture was shattered, the wedding was ruined, Kelly was gone, and my parents didn't know what to think. On the other hand, I knew the victory had been hollow. I felt no relief, no joy, no peace. There was only heaviness and a strange emptiness in my chest. I stared at my phone screen, at the dozens of messages from him and my parents, and wondered if I had become like him. I, too, had betrayed him. But not him, but my own conscience. I posted the video not only for the truth, but also for revenge to humiliate him. And now that I had succeeded, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had completely broken. For several days, I tried to live as usual, going to work, doing chores, but his voice kept ringing in my head. "I have one more secret." This phrase nagged at me, haunted me. I knew he hadn't said it by accident. He wanted me to think, to feel less safe. And he succeeded. In the evenings, I sat in silence and sorted through my memories, trying to recall the oddities in his behavior. And the more I thought about it, the more clearly I realized my brother was never who he pretended to be. He played the role of confident, successful, but in reality, he was always hiding something. I remembered how a couple of years ago he suddenly bought a car, even though he officially had a regular job and his salary clearly didn't allow for it. I didn't think anything of it then, but now it seemed different. I remembered how my father had once said that my brother often went missing, that he would ask for loans and then never pay them back. It all fit together, but it didn't provide an answer. I tried to distract myself, but at some point I realized I needed to get to the bottom of it, not for revenge, but for myself, to understand how deeply he was capable of lying and destroying everything around him. But before I started looking for answers, something happened that I never expected. A week after the wedding, Kelly came to see me. I opened the door and saw her. She looked haggard, her eyes were puffy, but there was a strange fire in them. She said we needed to talk. We sat across from each other, and she told me she hated me. Not for exposing him, but for doing it the way I did. She believed I was using her, making her part of my revenge plan. She said I had ruined not only his life, but hers too. Now she was the laughingstock of the town. People were talking about her, writing nasty things about her. She blamed me, but there was something more to her words, as if she was defending him. I asked why she had come if it was all over. And then she said she knew something about his secret. She said it calmly, as if throwing a stone at me. According to her, he had never been honest even with her. He hid meetings, went somewhere at night, said it was work, but returned with other people's smells and other people's money in his pockets. One day, she accidentally saw papers on him with names, amounts, and some signatures. She didn't pay any attention to it, but now she's sure. This wasn't just cheating, but something much more serious. I listened to her and felt my heart beat faster. She left, leaving with a parting word. "He'll destroy you too if you don't stop." And once again, I was left alone with a new mystery. I barely slept that night. It was clear to me that I was on the brink of something more than a family scandal. And the worst part was I caught myself wanting to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant getting me into the mud. I started following him again, this time openly. I saw him going to strange places, outskirt warehouses, cheap bars, motels. I didn't understand what he was doing, but I knew it wasn't just a job. I filmed him several times, collecting new footage. In it, he met with people, handed over envelopes, and received something in return. These looked like deals, clearly illegal ones. The more I learned, the stronger the feeling grew inside me that my war with him was only just beginning. But along with this came another realization. I was changing. I had become obsessed. I thought about nothing but his secrets. I stopped seeing my friends, abandoned my work. He was the only thing on my mind. And then one night, sitting at the computer and reviewing the footage, I realized I had taken a step from which there was no turning back. I no longer wanted to simply expose him. I wanted to destroy him completely. But at that very moment, something inside me broke. I asked myself, what will I become if I go all the way? Am I not the monster I consider him to be? And this question turned out to be more terrible than any truth. As I began gathering new suspicions and facts about my brother, I suddenly found myself becoming a hostage to this revenge. Every day, I thought only of him. Every morning, I woke up thinking that he might do something again, that my parents would take his side again, that this whole nightmare would never end. But at the same time, I began to feel tired. I wasn't enjoying life. I stopped laughing. I stopped communicating with friends. Work became a burden. Everything turned into a struggle, and I became terrified that I had trapped myself in this. And then an idea occurred to me. What if I tried to talk? What if I tried, at least for myself, to put an end to this, not through another scandal, but through conversation? Maybe this would give me a chance to break out of this cycle. Deep down, I knew my brother would never fully admit his guilt, but at least an attempt could change my inner state. I called my mother and said I wanted to come talk to them. She agreed, and there was hope in her voice. A couple of days later, I arrived at my parents' house. The atmosphere was tense, but I immediately noticed that my mother was trying to create a semblance of normality. Dinner was on the table, flowers in a vase, the smell of pie in the air. My brother was sitting at the table, my father next to me, and it was clear that everyone had been preparing for this meeting. We sat down. For the first few minutes, we ate in silence, no one daring to begin. Then my mother burst into tears and said she was tired of all this hatred. She said that we were brothers and should be together, that life was too short to destroy yourself and your family. I listened to her and knew she was right, but deep down, anger still simmered. Then my father said that if we couldn't reconcile, the family would fall apart completely. He spoke calmly, but his voice was an order, not a request. And then my brother spoke. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't wanted all this, that his feelings for Kelly were real, that he had made a mistake, but he hadn't wanted to betray me. He spoke the right words, and my mother nodded with relief, as if this moment had finally arrived. I listened, trying to discern whether he was sincere. But there was no guilt in his eyes. There was only calculation. He understood that now he needed to appear remorseful, otherwise his parents would turn their backs on him. And he was playing his part. I saw it because I knew him too well. After dinner, my mother suggested that we stay alone to talk. We went outside, stood by the car, and he immediately stopped playing the victim. His face changed, his voice became cold. He said he did it for my parents, that he didn't care about my feelings, that he never considered himself guilty. And that if I continued to dig under him, he would do everything to make me look crazy. He said that he still had people who trusted him, and he knew how to use them. His words hit harder than anything that had come before, because I suddenly realized he would never change. He may pretend, he may speak beautiful words, but inside he will always be like this, selfish, deceitful, ready to destroy anyone for his own gain. I stood there silently, clenching my fists, and felt the anger rising within me again. But I held back. I didn't want to give him a reason to paint me as the aggressor. He left, and I remained standing outside my parents' house, and at that moment my mother came out to me. She asked what we had talked about, and I didn't tell her the truth. I said that we had tried to talk, but things were still difficult. I saw her tears and knew that telling the truth would only destroy her even more. That night I returned home and couldn't sleep for a long time. I thought about how the attempt at reconciliation had achieved nothing. On the contrary, it had shown that my brother would never be honest. But something inside me changed. I realized I didn't want to waste my life exposing him again and again. I wanted out of this game, but at the same time, I knew he wouldn't leave me alone. And then a new idea occurred to me. If I couldn't change him, if I couldn't get justice from my parents, then maybe I should decide for myself how to put an end to this. Not through reconciliation, not through screaming, but through a step that would put him in his place once and for all. The thought was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I realized that I had a choice ahead of me. Either walk away from this whole thing and start my life from scratch, or see it through to the end, but this time in a way that wouldn't leave him a chance. I opened the door and froze when I saw her in the aisle. Kelly looked different than she had that night at the wedding, when everything had fallen apart. She was quieter, but there was a determination in her eyes I hadn't seen before. She placed a large envelope on my desk and didn't mince words, declaring she hadn't come to apologize or make excuses, but to set conditions that, in her opinion, would allow her to restore at least some of what had been destroyed. I watched her, trying to figure out where to find the old Kelly with whom I'd shared plans. But instead of my usual amusement, I saw a woman who had learned to calculate consequences and plot advantageous moves. She said she knew about my secret recordings and how I'd used the material, and this knowledge wasn't just a trivial, threatening phrase. She had copies of several files and a number of screenshots of conversations I'd once thought only I could access. Panic rose within me, but I forced calm outward and asked her what she did for a living and how she'd gotten it. When she replied that she hadn't wanted to get involved, but when the whole city started talking about her and threats were made against her work, she turned to a lawyer she knew, who advised her to gather everything she could possibly need. She explained that a lawyer had warned her about possible steps against me: violation of privacy, illegal recording and distribution of intimate materials, even if the recipients weren't strangers but family members. All of this could have consequences. I felt myself flush, knowing I'd acted impulsively and without regard for the law or the rights of others. But she wasn't just planning to press charges, she'd proposed a deal. She offered to officially drop the matter if I met 3 conditions. First, publicly admit my guilt to everyone, remove all copies of the video, and refrain from distributing it. Second, help her restore her reputation with her employer and among mutual friends, which meant testifying that certain things in her relationship with her brother were public and that she didn't want to be personally shamed. Third, pay a fixed sum, which she described as compensation for emotional distress and the professional losses she'd suffered. When she mentioned the figure, I felt myself initially stunned. The sum wasn't bad, but it wasn't exorbitant, clearly designed to avoid turning everything into a lawsuit while also demonstrating that she wasn't going to disappear without a trace. I asked why she wasn't demanding a public apology from her brother, why all this was against me, and she looked me straight in the eye and calmly replied that her brother was a master of appearances and that she valued family authority only when she needed it. The person who could restore her reputation best and most publicly, the one standing before her now and who had staged the show, had more resources and more responsibility. So it was me who could be expected to take real steps that would quickly correct the situation. Her reasoning was cold and pragmatic, and for a moment I saw her transform from victim to calculating player, and this angered me more than the pain before. I remembered the nights when we dreams of a house of children, and what was happening now seemed like a pure bargaining chip. I said I couldn't just take the money and hand it over, as if everything had been bought and sold, and she replied that she wasn't asking for sympathy, she was asking for concrete steps. Her eyes sparkled, and there was no pity in them. I realized she was acting for herself, and perhaps for her career, rather than for justice or love. But then another thought occurred to me. She could have truly suffered. She'd been fired, she was receiving insults, and she was trying to survive in this city, where reputation matters so much. I was ashamed of how everything had turned out, and the flimsy justification in my head, that I had acted out of pain, no longer seemed like a compelling argument in the court of men or the law. I asked for time to think, and she gave me 48 hours with a clear warning. If I didn't agree, she would go further and contact law enforcement, her employer, and demand the complete removal of the publicly posted material and compensation through the courts. I asked her to leave, saying I'd talk to a lawyer, but that same evening when she left, I felt an internal breakdown. On the one hand, the desire to make things right and perhaps atone for my guilt. On the other, the desire to make things right and perhaps atone for my guilt. On the other hand, there was pride and the memory of how she'd left for her brother and how he'd used her. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. He confirmed the real risks for me in this situation and advised me not to delay. I had to admit I'd acted rashly, and that admission weighed heavily on me. I wrote to Kelly, offering to meet and discuss the terms, not because I was willing to pay, but because I understood that a plan was needed to minimize the damage. When we met again, she was ready. In her bag was a printed list of her employer's contacts, screenshots of threats, letters of complaint, and letters from people who could confirm her damaged reputation. She wasn't just making empty threats. Then I offered an alternative to her demand for payment. Help her restore her reputation not with money, but with concrete actions. Arrange a meeting with her boss. Provide a written explanation that her participation in those events was the result of her brother's manipulation, and help her get her job back through my contacts. I also offered to publicly explain that the role I'd played was one of revenge, not justice, and, if possible, to remove all material from the internet, including the recordings of friends and guests. She thought about it and agreed to the deal on one condition. She wanted written guarantees and witnesses, otherwise her word wouldn't be taken seriously. We agreed to formulate a plan. First a legal consultation, then a meeting with her employer, then a public announcement, and simultaneously I was to make all copies of the video, transfer them to a secure drive for a lawyer, and sign a non-distribution agreement. Everything seemed appropriate and legally sound, but I felt distrust welling up inside me again. I began to suspect there was an underlying motive in this deal, and that she was exploiting my desire to atone for my guilt for her own ends. I found the strength to ask her directly why she really needed the money if she wanted her job back, and she replied that part of the money would go toward counseling and legal counseling, part to cover the losses from her dismissal, and part to cover living expenses away from the city, because she wasn't ready to deal with all those who were judging her. This explanation sounded plausible and touching, but I still felt like I was being used. Nevertheless, I agreed to take action, to meet with her boss and give a written statement. We drafted a letter, I signed the agreement, and then something I didn't expect happened. That same evening, my brother wrote and demanded to meet with his parents. He had heard about our meeting and was ready to settle the situation. I sensed how the whole plan could fall apart. My brother could play along with her, he could feign repentance and take everything back, and our efforts would be in vain. At the meeting with his parents, my brother was attentive and caring, as if the crime had been washed away with tears. He promised to do everything to eliminate the consequences and asked me to withdraw my public statements and delete the video. I now understood that my plan with Kelly needed to be more precise. We decided to meet, the three of us, she, me, and her lawyer, to discuss the terms of settling the dispute. At this meeting, many new and unpleasant things emerged. My brother had no intention of paying the moral debt for his actions. He was simply trying to maintain his image, and worse, trying to convince my parents that everything could be resolved privately. My mother, tired of the scandals and wanting peace, pressured me to back off, while my father also asked for the matter to be hushed up. Kelly looked tense, but she held on because she knew that without her determination, nothing would work. At some point, my brother, sensing the threat of losing our parents' trust, lost it and called me names that had long been part of his vocabulary. He said I was crazy, that my actions were criminal, and that now he would sue me. The word file sounded like a challenge when he said it, and for the first time I felt fear creep across my skin. A criminal record, arguments, bankruptcy. It could all come crashing down overnight. But then Kelly intervened harshly and unexpectedly, producing printouts showing how my brother had transferred large sums to an unknown woman's card and how he had borrowed from family members without repaying them. These documents weren't criminal evidence per se, but they were compelling and undermined his story of honesty. My parents latched onto the printouts, wondering why they hadn't known this before. My brother blushed and began mumbling excuses, but my parents' firm refusal turned to us, and a new energy filled the room. Perhaps we had a chance not only to settle the legal matter, but also to hold him accountable to his family for his financial misdeeds. I thought then that this strange conflation of interests, my guilt, her defense, his threats, Dad's tired eyes, might ultimately lead to a truth that transcends revenge. But at the same time, I sensed that such deals change people, that we are all complicit in calculations and manipulations, and that there was no pure, innocent path left. I understood that paying her or helping to restore her reputation would not restore the lost trust, and that this deal was merely an attempt to atone, not erase, the pain. Nevertheless, we moved forward with the agreed-upon plan. I gave all copies of the video to Kelly's lawyer for signature. We prepared a joint cease and desist statement, and I gave an affidavit detailing the details that only we knew. Kelly responded publicly by stating that she no longer wished to be the subject of discussion, and that any claims against her should be directed not to her, but to the one who had hurt her. This move softened the tension in society, but it didn't alleviate the emptiness within me. I knew I'd taken a step toward reconciliation, but it came at the cost of my own humiliation and the admission of my mistakes. Deep down, I realized another question had arisen. Can betrayal be atoned for with words and legal documents, and should I even expect redemption from those who betrayed me in the first place? This thought gnaws at me to this day, and I know there are still many conversations, decisions, and perhaps new compromises ahead, but one thing was clear. Kelly's return wasn't a simple plea for forgiveness. It had become a deal between people trying to preserve the remnants of themselves in this raging fire, and now how we handled the truth and our actions would determine not only their fate, but also my ability to ever trust again. After that meeting with Kelly and my brother, I thought history would calm down a bit, but life once again showed me that there would be no peace. I tried to stay out of their way, to stay out of their squabbles, to keep my word, and finally turn the spotlight on myself, but news about them kept finding me. We shared a circle of acquaintances. My parents couldn't keep their mouths shut, and I kept hearing rumors about how they were struggling to make a family life. They said my brother was trying to act like a model husband, taking Kelly out to restaurants, appearing with her at events, pretending their marriage was going through a rough patch, but holding together. It was unpleasant to hear, but I tried to ignore it until one day I learned something that turned everything upside down again. A friend I went to school with called and said he'd seen my brother at a bar on the outskirts of town. He wasn't with friends or colleagues, but with a girl who was clearly not Kelly. They acted as if they'd known each other for a long time. He hugged her, held her hand, and then they left together. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was an exaggeration or an accident, but a few days later, another friend told a similar story. Not at a bar anymore, but at a hotel on the outskirts of town. My brother had booked a room for the evening, and the same woman was with him. My stomach clenched. I knew these weren't rumors. He was still doing the same thing he'd done to me, only now he was betraying Kelly. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to close my eyes and say, "It's not my problem, let him figure it out." But another part couldn't accept that this man was ruining lives again and doing it with impunity. I felt that if I kept quiet, I'd become as complicit as my parents, who always swept everything under the rug. I started gathering evidence. I went to that same bar and spoke to the bartender. He confirmed that he'd seen my brother several times with the same woman, who was definitely not his wife. I asked a friend at the hotel, and he hinted that my brother had indeed been there and always paid in cash to leave no trace. But the traces remained. Cameras, logbooks, people who remember. I knew I had a new trump card, but with it, the question arose again. Is it worth it? Is it worth ruining someone else's life again, even if it's Kelly who had betrayed me once? Should I warn her or give her a chance to open her eyes? These doubts kept me awake, but the answer came to me when I bumped into Kelly at the store. She looked tired, her eyes red, as if from lack of sleep, and she was holding only a couple of groceries as if she lived alone. We exchanged a few words, and I detected a coldness in her voice. She no longer tried to feign efficiency or maintain a stern demeanor. She was broken, and in that moment I realized she doesn't know. She thinks she's trying to save the marriage, that she's enduring humiliation in order to get everything back, while he continues to have affairs. It was like déjà vu. The same pattern, the same excuses, the same lies. Only now she was the victim, and I realized that if I kept quiet, I would be no better than my brother. I decided to check everything out. For several days, I followed him myself. It was humiliating, driving for my own blood, sitting in the car and waiting for him to leave the office or the bar. But in the end, I got my way. I saw with my own eyes how he got into the car with that woman, how they drove to the motel and disappeared inside. I filmed it on my phone. The evidence was irrefutable. That evening, I sat at home, watched the footage, and felt a strange feeling. It was a mixture of anger, pain, and some kind of bitter justice. My brother hasn't changed. He will always be like this. He doesn't know what loyalty is. He uses people and abandons them when he gets tired of them. And I knew that Kelly had to know the truth. The only question was how. Tell her directly, show her the video, or stage another demonstration like that one at the wedding. My thoughts raced, and every option seemed simultaneously right and wrong. If I told her directly, she might not believe me. She might think it was just another revenge plot. If I showed the evidence publicly, I would ruin her life again in front of everyone. If I kept silent, she would live in an illusion. I didn't know what to do. The next day, my brother called me himself. His voice was calm, even friendly. He said he wanted to meet and talk, as if after all the scandals we could just discuss the situation. I agreed, but inside I was seething. We met at a cafe, and he started talking about how he was tired of arguing, how his parents were worried, and how Kelly was starting to doubt the marriage. He spoke as if he himself were a victim of circumstances. I listened and couldn't stand it anymore. I took out my phone and showed him the recording of him entering a motel with a woman. His face changed. He froze for a second, then grinned and said that I was meddling in none of my business. That every man has his own fun and that Kelly would never know unless I told him myself. He added that if I revealed this, I would completely lose my parents' trust because they wouldn't survive it. His words sounded like both a threat and a challenge. I looked at him and understood that there were no winners in this story. There were only ruined lives. I left the cafe, seething inside. I knew the choice was mine. Should I tell Kelly and give her a chance to leave? or keep silent and leave her in the same hell I once found myself in. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt that this wasn't just about revenge, but about who I was. A person willing to turn a blind eye, or someone willing to risk telling the truth again, no matter how painful it might be. I hesitated for a long time, tormented by doubts, but at some point I realized there was no choice. I had to tell Kelly the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. Not for revenge or to put my brother in his place, but for her own sake. Because in some strange, twisted way, I still felt something for her, and that part of me wouldn't let me turn a blind eye to her being betrayed again. I arranged to meet her. It wasn't easy. After everything that had happened, she wasn't eager to talk to me. But I insisted, saying it was serious and that it directly concerned her. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. She arrived wary, reserved, her eyes no longer holding the sparkle that had once captivated me. She looked tired, like someone who had long ago lost their footing and was clinging to what was left. We ordered coffee and sat in silence for the first few minutes. My insides were seething, but I knew that if I spoke the words, her life would collapse again. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. She looked at me coldly, as if bracing herself for another attack. I turned on the video. The screen showed everything. My brother getting out of the car, his arm around another woman's waist, then them entering the motel. The image was crystal clear. At first, Kelly frowned as if not understanding what she was seeing, then her eyes widened, her breathing ragged. She sat motionless like stone, only her lips trembling slightly. I turned off the screen. The silence was more oppressive than any scream. She wasn't crying. This surprised me. I expected tears, hysteria, but instead she sat there completely dead inside. Then she looked up and asked, "Why are you showing me this?" There was no anger or gratitude in her voice, only cold indifference. I froze. Everything inside me turned over. I told her that she had the right to know the truth, that I couldn't remain silent any longer when I saw him doing to her the same thing he once did to me. She listened, but her expression didn't change. And only after a couple of minutes did she quietly say, "Do you think I didn't guess?" Those words hit harder than anything I'd heard before. She knew. She sensed that he was lying, that he was leaving for others, but she clung to the illusion. Because admitting reality meant admitting her life was built on a lie, that she'd made the wrong choice, that she'd betrayed me for a man who'd never been faithful to her. Her hands trembled, but her gaze remained firm. She said it was over now, that she didn't intend to waste any more years justifying him. And she added that she hated not only him, but me too, for revealing the truth, for destroying her world again, this time completely. Those words cut into me like a knife. I wanted to object, to say that it wasn't me who had destroyed it, but him, that I had merely opened my eyes. But I realized, for her, it made no difference. The truth hurts more than a lie, and whoever tells it becomes an enemy. She stood up, took her bag, and left, leaving me alone at the table. I sat and looked at the door that closed behind her and felt a strange emptiness. I expected relief, triumph, maybe even gratitude. But instead, there was only the feeling that I had lost again. Not because I was wrong, but because there could be no winners in this story. A few days later, I learned that Kelly had filed for divorce. My parents were shocked. My brother was furious, blaming everyone but himself. He called me, screaming that I had ruined his life, that I had always envied him and dreamed of destroying him. I remained silent. I no longer had the strength to prove anything. I looked at him and saw a man who was digging his own hole, and all I had done was let the earth cave in. My parents tried to intervene, trying to persuade me to make peace with my brother, telling me that family should come first. But for the first time in my life, I answered them firmly. Family is not a lie or a betrayal. Family is when people keep their word. After that, I stopped communicating with them. This decision was difficult, but I understood that as long as I was around, they would pretend nothing had happened. I needed to get out of this cycle. The last time I saw my brother was after the divorce. He looked broken, lost, but even then he didn't admit his guilt. He tried to blame me again, saying that I took everything from him, that I was jealous and had orchestrated it on purpose. I listened and suddenly realized that I was no longer hurt. I looked into his eyes and said, "You destroyed everything yourself. I only showed the truth." And then I left. That was our last conversation. Kelly disappeared from my life. I didn't try to look for her, I didn't call, I didn't write. She chose to leave alone, and I understood that this was her only chance of survival. Maybe, somewhere deep down, I hoped that she would someday understand that I did it not for revenge, but to free her. But even if that didn't happen, I didn't regret it. because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done what I had to. This story taught me that betrayal cannot be hushed up, no matter how much you love or hate a person. Sooner or later, the truth always comes out. And those who betray become victims of their own lies. And me, I was left alone. But in that emptiness, there was more honesty than in their entire false life together.